The wind screamed like a living thing. Snow drove sideways through the darkness, each flake a tiny blade against the mountain lodge windows. Inside, the fireplace roared orange and gold, casting dancing shadows across mahogany walls and leather furniture that cost more than most people's homes. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the vast room until the moment everything changed. 3:22 in the morning. The door exploded inward, wind and snow and raw desperation pouring through the gap. A woman staggered into the warmth, and immediately everything went wrong. Her dark hair hung plastered to her face, soaked, and the back of her nanny uniform was drenched crimson. Deep crimson. Moving crimson. Blood seeping through the thin fabric like water through paper, her body trembling so violently that each step was a small collapse waiting to happen. She was 29 years old but looked like life had aged her by decades. Her left hand was clenched so tightly around a small gold locket that her knuckles had turned white, the bones pressing against the skin like they might break through. Her breathing came in gasps, each one ragged and desperate, the sound of someone whose body was shutting down in stages. Nico Ferraro stood by the fireplace, a man built entirely from controlled violence, and he went absolutely still. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, his black tailored suit perfectly fitted across a chest that suggested years of deliberate physical conditioning. His dark hair was slicked back from a face that had been called beautiful by people foolish enough to confuse danger with beauty. A thin scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, pale against olive skin, a permanent reminder of the night his father died. His eyes were storm gray, the kind of eyes that had watched men beg, and he rarely blinked. He did not blink now. Carlo and Theo, his lieutenants, froze mid-conversation. Carlo, the older one with silver threading through his dark hair, had his hand moving toward the concealed weapon at his ribs. Theo, younger, faster, was already stepping sideways to put distance between himself and the bleeding woman collapsing onto the polished floor. But Nico did not move. The stranger's eyes found his across the room, and something passed between them. Recognition. But that was impossible. This was a woman he had never seen before this moment, a woman dripping blood and snow onto his imported Italian marble, and yet her eyes held something that stopped him from calling for his men to remove her. She whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling like a candle in the wind, "You're the man from the wallet." Nico's expression did not change. Nothing in his face shifted, nothing in his posture altered, and yet every person in the room felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Carlo exchanged a single glance with Theo. In the 8 years they had worked for Nico Ferraro, they had never heard him addressed by a stranger. They had never seen a stranger collapse bleeding into his private sanctuary. They had never seen him approach a bleeding woman without first removing his suit jacket. But he was moving now, slow and deliberate, each step controlled as a general surveying a battlefield. He knelt beside her, and this alone was a shock. The most dangerous man in Chicago did not kneel. The most powerful crime boss in the Midwest did not bend. And yet Nico Ferraro knelt beside this bleeding stranger and looked at her face as if she held the answer to a question he had been asking for years. "I need you to stay conscious," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "What is your name?" "Rowan," she whispered. "Rowan Morales." I found your wallet. In the rain. 2 nights ago. On the west side. There was a photograph inside, and I couldn't keep it. I brought it back because—" She could not finish. Her eyes were rolling back, the white showing, her body beginning to collapse into itself like a puppet with its strings cut. "Rowan." His voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Look at me. Look at my eyes. Stay with me." She forced her eyes back to his, and what she saw there kept her conscious through sheer force of will. This man was terrifying. This man was dangerous. This man was also, impossibly, the only safe place she had encountered in what felt like an eternity of falling. "Call the doctor," Nico said to Carlo without looking away from Rowan's face. "Tell him we need him here in 6 minutes. No more. And call the helicopter. We are going to the private hospital in the city." Tell them they have a trauma case incoming and they need the surgical team prepped before we land. Theo, find her something dry and warm. Move. Carlo and Theo moved like ghosts, already pulling out phones before their feet carried them from the room. Nico remained kneeling beside Rowan Morales, this stranger who had somehow found his wallet in a November rainstorm, a wallet containing the only photograph he still possessed of his wife. The wife who had been dead for 11 years. The wife whose death had taught him that the world rewards cruelty and punishes mercy, and that love is only another word for vulnerability. He had spent the entire night tracking down the nanny who had found his wallet. It should have been impossible. The neighborhood where it was found was sprawling, dangerous, forgotten by the city. But Nico Ferraro had resources that moved through Chicago like water through a sieve. He had found the Salvation Army donation center where Rowan had asked about turning in lost items. He had found the hospital where she worked the night shift, where she had gone asking for the owner of the wallet. He had found her address, a cramped studio apartment on the west side worth less than the suit he was wearing. And he had discovered something that had stopped him entirely. She had been offered money. $10,000. His men had made the offer directly. Return the wallet, claim the reward. Rowan Morales had refused. She had returned the wallet to the police station instead, along with a detailed description of where it had been found. No name given. No reward collected. $10,000 walked away from because she could not keep something that did not belong to her. In the 8 years since his wife's death, in the 10 years before that spent building his empire through fear and bloodshed, Nico Ferraro had learned a single truth: nobody is honest. Honesty is a luxury for people who have enough. People with nothing steal, and people with something protect it. The world runs on this simple mathematics. But this woman had refused $10,000. Now she was bleeding on his floor, and he was pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around her, this expensive black wool that cost more than her annual salary, and her eyes were closing even as she fought to keep them open. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to bleed on your floor. I did not know where else to go." He was going to. Derek was going to, and I could not. SHHHH. His voice was like soothing a lost child. "You are safe now. Nothing can touch you here. I am going to carry you to the helicopter, and we are going to the hospital, and a surgeon is going to close the wound on your back. Do you understand?" She nodded, or tried to. Her eyes were fully closed now, consciousness slipping away like water through a sieve, and Nico lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Her mother's gold locket fell from her limp fist and clattered across the marble floor, spinning once, twice, and coming to rest in a shaft of firelight. He was going to carry her to the helicopter when he stopped, turned back, and carefully retrieved the locket. He placed it in her curled hand and pressed her fingers closed around it. "You came here to return something that was not yours," he said to her sleeping face. "That is a rare thing in this world. That is a precious thing." The helicopter was waiting on the mountain lodge landing pad, its rotors already spinning, the sound like a storm approaching. The wind was brutal, the snow falling thick enough to reduce visibility to 30 feet. But Nico Ferraro carried Rowan Morales out into that storm without hesitation, and Carlo and Theo watched from the lodge windows as he climbed into the helicopter with her still bleeding, still unconscious, still somehow the most important thing that had happened to any of them in years. The helicopter lifted into the darkness. The snow swallowed it within seconds. And now, let us go back to where this began. 6 hours earlier. A November rainstorm on Chicago's west side, where the streets are cracked and the people are broken, and one woman was about to discover that kindness still has a price. The November rain hammered down on Chicago's west side like a punishment God had decided the city deserved. The pavement was cracked and weeping, reflecting neon signs in shattered fragments of red and blue and sickly yellow. Rowan Morales walked through it all without an umbrella because umbrellas cost money and money was something she no longer possessed in any meaningful quantity. She had just finished a 14-hour shift at the Blackwell estate, watching Emma, 6 years old, draw pictures of trees and flowers in a mansion that cost more than Rowan would earn in 40 lifetimes. The child had fallen asleep at 8 o'clock, her small hand still gripping a colored pencil, and Rowan had carried her upstairs to a bedroom with silk curtains and a canopy bed and everything soft and safe that the world could offer to someone loved. Now, walking through the rain in her nanny uniform, a thin grey dress that clung to her body and offered no warmth, Rowan Morales had exactly $17 to her name. $17. She knew this because she had counted it 4 times in the past hour, standing in the employee's bathroom at the restaurant where she worked her second job, flipping through 5 $1 bills and 12 coins like they were treasures that might vanish if she stopped looking at them. $17 had to last until Friday. It was Monday night. The rain soaked through her coat at the shoulders and her shoes made wet sounds against the pavement. Her hands were numb. Her lips had lost all feeling about 3 blocks back. She was thinking about the can of soup in her apartment, the one she had been saving for emergencies, when something caught her eye. A black leather wallet lay on the sidewalk near the entrance to a restaurant called Marino's, half submerged in a puddle that reflected the restaurant's neon sign like a tiny, drowning mirror. Rowan stopped walking. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, looking at that wallet as if it might be a test. As if God was finally, after 8 years of silence and suffering, asking her a direct question. She picked it up. The leather was expensive, supple, even wet, the kind of leather that came from somewhere other than the outlet mall. She opened it slowly, her wet fingers fumbling with the clasp. $2,000 in cash. She counted it twice. She did not want to believe it, so she counted it again. 20 $100 bills, arranged like neat little soldiers in a leather compartment designed specifically for their storage. Her entire world shifted. $2,000 was rent for 4 months. $2,000 was Emma's winter coat and her own winter coat and real food from the grocery store instead of damaged packages from the back of restaurants. $2,000 was the difference between drowning and breathing. But then she saw the photograph. It was tucked in the card slot, a small square of faded color showing a woman's face. Dark hair, dark eyes, smiling in the way that people smile when they are truly loved by whoever is behind the camera. The photograph was worn. The edges were soft from being touched, from being held, from being looked at so many times that the paper itself had begun to surrender to the weight of that attention. This was not a photograph someone had forgotten in a wallet. This was a photograph someone carried as if it were a prayer. Rowan stood in the rain and looked at that face and understood, in the way that broken people understand each other across any distance, that this woman had been loved. She turned the wallet back over. The ID read Nico. The address was a building downtown that probably had a doorman and marble floors and the kind of quiet that only money could purchase. She looked at the $2,000 again. She thought about Emma. She thought about herself. She thought about the way that photo was worn, as if love was something that could be measured in the softness of its edges. At 10:15 that night, Rowan walked into Marino's restaurant and handed the wallet to the hostess, a woman with purple eyeshadow and tired eyes that recognized another tired person immediately. "I found this outside," Rowan said. The water dripped from her uniform onto the polished floor. "I think someone important might need it back." The hostess took the wallet and looked at the name on the ID. Something shifted in her expression. "There's a reward," she said carefully. "Mr. Ferraro is very generous with." "I don't want a reward," Rowan said. "I just want him to get it back." She turned and walked out into the rain before anyone could stop her, before anyone could convince her that she was making a mistake, before she could change her mind about being a person who returned things instead of keeping them. The rain felt colder on her skin than it had before, as if giving away $2,000 had somehow lowered her body temperature. She walked for 6 more blocks before she realized she was shaking. At 11:30 that night, Nico Ferraro received a phone call in his office on the 42nd floor of a building that gleamed above downtown Chicago like a monument to violence made legitimate through enough money and enough time. "Mr. Ferraro," the voice on the phone said. "Someone turned in your wallet." A young woman, nanny uniform, wouldn't leave her name. She refused any reward and walked out before I could even thank her. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that made phone lines nervous. Nico Ferraro was holding the phone to his ear, his other hand pressed flat against the window, looking out at the city that belonged to him. Rain was streaming down the glass. The skyline looked like it was drowning. "Find her," he said. His voice was not loud. His voice was like venom. Like a blade wrapped in ice. "Find out who she is, where she lives, who she works for. I want her name, her address, her schedule, and I want it within 2 hours." He set the phone down before the hostess could respond, though her voice was still saying yes sir, into the dead air. He turned back to the window. His hand was shaking, and Nico Ferraro did not allow his hands to shake. He had trained himself out of that habit years ago, after the night his wife died. The photograph in the wallet was the only one he had left of her face. He had looked at it so many times that he knew every detail, every shadow, every pixel of light that had landed on her skin when the camera clicked. The edges were soft from his thumbs. He had not let anyone else touch it in 3 years. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Send Carlo and Theo," he said. "And have the Range Rover brought around." Within minutes, 2 men entered his office. Carlo was tall and broad, with a scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, a gift from a business deal gone wrong 15 years ago. Theo was smaller but faster, with hands that could move a gun from his waistband to firing position in less than a second. They had worked for Nico Ferraro for 12 years. They had never seen him stand up from his desk with this particular look in his eyes. "We are finding someone," Nico said. It was not a request. It was not even really information. It was simply a fact that would be true within hours. "A woman. A nanny. She turned in my wallet an hour ago at Marino's. I want to know everything about her." Carlo nodded. He did not ask questions. The men who worked for Nico Ferraro learned very quickly that questions were a luxury they could not afford. By midnight, they had security footage from the restaurant. A young woman, early 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a grey nanny's uniform that hung on her body as if she had been shaped by deprivation. She moved carefully, as if she was used to taking up as little space as possible. When she set the wallet down, her hands were gentle. She did not look at the hostess. She did not wait for thanks. She simply turned and left, as if she was afraid that gratitude might hurt her. "That's her," Nico said, watching the footage on the monitor in his car as they drove through the rain. "Find out where she works." By 1 in the morning, they had the Blackwell name. By 1:15, they had the mansion address. By 1:30, a call to the household manager revealed that the nanny, one Rowan Morales, had been asked to open the family's mountain lodge property for the weekend. She would be driving there tonight. She would arrive around 3 in the morning. "The lodge is 2 hours north," Carlo said from the driver's seat. The Range Rover cut through the rain like a blade through water, its headlights illuminating a tunnel of wet darkness ahead. "We can be there in 90 minutes if you want to intercept." Nico did not answer immediately. He was looking at the photograph again, the one from the wallet, the one that showed his dead wife's face. He was thinking about the equation of the universe, the way that miracles did not announce themselves, the way that sometimes the smallest actions contained entire storms of consequence. "Drive," he said finally. "Faster." The mountain lodge appeared out of the blizzard at 3:18 in the morning like a ghost materializing from nothing. Snow covered everything, the driveway, the steps, the railings, as if the world was trying to erase even the memory of human habitation. Nico Ferraro's Range Rover pulled up the drive with its headlights cutting through the white chaos. He was about to step out of the car when he heard it. A scream. Not a scream of surprise. Not a scream of joy or shock or any of the small, manageable versions of human terror. This was a scream that contained 8 years of silence finally breaking open. This was a scream that came from the place where a person stops being able to hold things inside anymore. Nico Ferraro moved toward that sound the way a predator moves toward wounded prey, fast and certain and without hesitation. Carlo and Theo were beside him, their hands already moving toward the weapons they carried like other men carried heartbeats. The front door of the lodge was locked. Nico did not bother knocking. He simply pushed through it, his shoulder meeting the wood with the force of a man who had never encountered anything he could not break. Inside, the lodge smelled like fireplace and dust and the sharp, chemical smell of fear. Every light was on. Rowan Morales stood in the center of the great room, her clothes torn, blood running down her back in thin, crimson lines, her mother's gold locket clutched in her trembling hand. And standing across from her, his face twisted with rage and entitlement, was Derek Collins. The restaurant manager. The man who owned her life through blackmail and violence and the knowledge that she had nowhere else to go. Time did something strange. It folded. It compressed. For one impossible moment, Nico Ferraro existed in two places at once, in the present, staring at this broken girl covered in her own blood, and in the past, holding his wife's photograph, understanding that the universe had just delivered something he had not earned and could never deserve. "Get away from her," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 15 degrees. Derek Collins turned toward him with a sneer already forming, the expression of a man who had never encountered a consequence he could not talk his way out of. What he saw in Nico Ferraro's eyes made him go very still. "This is not your business," Derek said, but his voice had lost its edge. It was the voice of a man who had just realized he had made a mistake that would consume the rest of his life. Nico did not respond. He simply looked at Rowan, and something in that look, something that contained protection and rage and an understanding of pain so complete that it transcended words, made her knees buckle. She fell toward the fireplace like a tree being felled, and Nico moved toward her with the care of a man soothing a lost child. The blizzard had teeth. That was Rowan Morales' last clear thought before the headlights cut through the darkness at 2:58 a.m., twin beams of light that turned the lodge's great room into a stage. She had been alone for 47 minutes, long enough to coax a fire from the stone fireplace, long enough to stop shaking. Not long enough to feel safe. Her phone buzzed on the leather table beside her. The screen glowed in the darkness. A text message. Then another. Then three more arriving in rapid succession like gunshots in the silence. "Derek Collins. I know you're alone tonight. I know where you are. Mountain Lodge. Route 41 North. Did you really think you could run from me?" The next message made her stomach drop like a stone into black water. "I'm coming for you, Rowan. And this time, you won't get away." She did not move. She did not scream. She just stared at those words, each letter a small blade, and understood that the 8 years she had spent silent were about to end whether she was ready or not. 8 years. She had been 21 years old when Derek Collins hired her at the hotel restaurant in Chicago. She was desperate then, undocumented, terrified, with nothing in the world except $17 and her mother's gold locket hanging beneath her shirt like a talisman. The locket contained her mother's photograph, taken before the cancer. Before everything broke. Derek had smiled at her on that first day. His teeth were very white. His fingernails were clean. He had seemed safe. He had cornered her in the kitchen 3 weeks later. His hand had moved so quickly she almost didn't see it happen, fingers closing around her wrist, his voice dropping to something that sounded like velvet wrapped around a blade. "You work very hard," he had said. "That's admirable. But I need to know you're loyal. I need to know you understand what it means to be grateful to the people who give you work when nobody else will hire someone like you." She had understood. Understanding had come as naturally as breathing. The first time he hit her, she had been shocked by how little sound her body made. No screaming. No sounds at all. Just the impact, and the way her vision swam, and the smell of her own blood mixing with the smell of cooking oil from the kitchen. "You're undocumented, aren't you?" he had whispered into her hair. "One call to immigration and you're on a plane back to a country where you have nothing. Nobody would believe you. Who would you tell? The police? Think about that." She had thought about it. Every single day for 8 years, she had thought about it. The phone buzzed again. Another message arrived, "I'm leaving Chicago right now. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Rowan grabbed the phone with shaking hands. She deleted the messages. She deleted the message thread. She deleted his contact. As if deleting words could delete the man himself. As if erasing the evidence could make him stop existing. It could not. At 3:05 a.m., headlights appeared again on the mountain road. They approached slowly, deliberately, like a predator closing in on prey that had made the mistake of running. The headlights disappeared. A car door slammed. Then footsteps on the gravel, and she heard the sound, the one sound she had learned to fear more than thunder or gunshots. Derek Collins's breathing. He found her in the kitchen area of the lodge, near the granite countertop and the hanging copper pots. She had thought of locking the door. She had thought of running. She had thought of calling 911. But her hands had refused to move. Her voice had refused to work. She was a locked door with no key, a locked throat with no scream. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Derek said. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, dressed in black jeans and a leather jacket that smelled like gasoline and cigarette smoke. His eyes were colorless, like looking into nothing at all. "Did you think you could take my money and run?" "I didn't take anything," Rowan said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I never took." His hand came up so fast she saw only a blur before impact. Pain exploded across her face. The taste of blood filled her mouth. Copper and salt. She fell against the counter, gasping. "You took my time. You took my generosity. You took the life I gave you when you were nothing." He grabbed her by the throat, and his fingers were like iron bands closing around her neck. "And now you're going to take what you deserve." She fought. She did not know where the strength came from, but her hands came up and she clawed at his face, drawing blood, and she heard him scream. She twisted away and grabbed a knife from the counter, the blade suddenly light and deadly in her hand. She had never held a weapon before. She had never imagined herself as someone who would fight back. But Derek was faster. He slammed her against the stone counter and the knife flew from her hand and skittered across the floor like a living thing. Pain exploded across her back as he drove her into the edge. Something tore. Something deep inside her ripped open and warm blood began to spread across her skin, running down like water, and she understood that she was dying. This was what dying felt like. She ran. Her vision tunneled and her legs were moving without permission and she was stumbling through the lodge, past the armchairs and the bookshelves, toward the great room and the fire still burning in the fireplace. Behind her she could hear Derek cursing, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, and she knew with absolute certainty that if he caught her again, she would not walk away. She burst through the doorway at 3:22 a.m. into a room she thought was empty. It was not. Nico Ferraro stood near the bar, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, studying the fire with the expression of a man staring into a mirror. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of empires. His suit was charcoal gray, Italian wool, tailored to perfection, worth more than every possession Rowan had ever owned combined. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, silver in the firelight. His eyes were storm gray and absolutely empty. He turned at the sound of her collapse. For one impossible moment, time folded. Nico Ferraro existed in two places at once, in the present, staring at this broken girl covered in blood, and in the past, holding his wife's photograph, understanding that the universe had just delivered something he had not earned and could never deserve. "Get away from her," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The temperature in the room seemed to drop like a stone falling down a well. Derek Collins stopped moving. He turned toward Nico with a sneer already forming, the expression of a man who had never encountered a consequence he could not talk his way out of. What he saw in Nico Ferraro's eyes made him go very still. "This is not your business," Derek said. But his voice had lost its edge. It was the voice of a man who had just realized he had made a mistake that would consume the rest of his life. Nico did not respond. He simply looked at Rowan, and something in that look, something that contained protection and rage and an understanding of pain so complete that it transcended words, made her knees buckle completely. She fell toward the fireplace like a tree being felled, and Nico moved toward her with the care of a man soothing a lost child. "Call Carlo," Nico said quietly. "Tell him to bring the medical kit. Then sweep the perimeter." A man emerged from the shadows. Theo, his features sharp as a blade, his suit as dark as his reputation. He moved without question, disappeared toward the entrance. Moments later, a white SUV could be heard spinning gravel, fleeing down the mountain into the darkness. Nico caught Rowan before she hit the ground. The warmth of the fire against her frozen skin felt like salvation. His cologne, something expensive, something that smelled of cedar and smoke mixed with the wood smoke from the fireplace. The texture of his suit jacket was impossibly soft beneath her torn fingers. She could hear the sound of his heartbeat, steady and absolute, completely unmoved by the violence that had just occurred in his sanctuary. "Lay still," he said. His voice was like thunder, solid and deep and containing an oath that could never be broken. "You are safe now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to surrender to the warmth and the darkness and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the universe had delivered something besides pain. But the taste of fear was still metallic in her mouth. The afternoon light slanted through the lodge windows in hard, cold angles. Rowan stood in the marble entry hall, her phone trembling in her hand as the notifications stacked one on top of another like an avalanche with no bottom. 17 messages. 43. 82. Each one a blade cutting deeper. Evelyn's name was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The posts had gone live at 2:41 p.m., and the lies were constructed with surgical precision. Theft from the restaurant's register. Inappropriate touching of Emma. Immigration fraud. Rowan's hands shook so violently she could barely read the words through the blur of tears. One post had been shared 8,000 times already. Another had 23,000 comments, most of them calling for her arrest. Then came the message that broke something inside her. It was from Emma's school. Emma had been picked up early by her mother. Evelyn had written a letter to the institution claiming Rowan was a danger to the child, and the letter carried Evelyn's signature and her charitable foundation's letterhead, which meant it carried weight, which meant it carried power. Rowan walked outside into the November afternoon. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a freezing drizzle that fell from a sky the color of old concrete. The rain soaked through the borrowed sweater, finding the gaps between the fabric and her skin. Cold began to creep into her bones like a slow poison. She stood at the edge of the gravel drive, looking out at the dark pines that surrounded the lodge, and something in her chest began to collapse inward like a building being demolished. The $17 was still in her pocket. Her mother's gold locket hung against her heart, the metal now warm from her body heat. Everything she owned in the world fit inside a single borrowed backpack. Everything. The voice in her head, Derek's voice, Evelyn's voice, the voice of every person who had ever looked through her like she was invisible, whispered with absolute certainty. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was nobody. Maybe fighting just made it worse. Maybe the only kindness she could offer Emma was to disappear, to let the child forget her, to start walking into these woods and never emerge. Maybe that was the last gift she had left to give. Her phone buzzed. Another message. She didn't open it. The rain fell harder. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. How easy it would be to keep walking. How simple. How final. Then she heard it, the sound of Nico's voice carrying through the open lodge door, low and urgent and absolutely controlled. She could hear Carlo's voice responding. Theo's. The three of them were gathered in the study, surrounded by laptops and phones, their voices layered over each other in a way that suggested a single organism working toward a single purpose. Working for her. Someone was fighting for her. Someone was refusing to let her be erased. Rowan walked back inside. The warmth of the fireplace hit her like a physical force, driving back the cold that had begun to crystallize in her lungs. Nico looked up from the laptop where Carlo was pulling data across multiple screens. Their eyes met. Rowan's breath caught. Without speaking, Nico stood and crossed the room, extending his hand. "Are you ready?" His voice was like a question and a promise at the same time. She took his hand. His grip was steady enough to anchor her. "Yes," she whispered. At 5:03 p.m., Carlo and two men in charcoal suits arrived at Derek Collins's apartment on the North Shore. The building was expensive enough that the lobby had marble floors and a doorman who knew when to look away. Carlo's suit cost more than Derek's monthly rent. His movements had the economy of violence, nothing wasted, everything precise. When Derek opened the door, his face went the color of old paper. Carlo did not smile. "Mr. Ferraro would like to discuss the matter of stolen wages," Carlo said quietly. "You will come with us, or we will conduct the discussion here. Choose." Derek tried to close the door. One of the men in charcoal placed a hand against it. The door opened again. Derek's eyes darted between them like an animal searching for an escape route that did not exist. "There's been a mistake," Derek said. His voice had fractured into higher registers. "I don't know what you think." The cameras installed in the women's changing room at the restaurant, Carlo continued, stepping into the apartment uninvited. The spreadsheets documenting stolen tips. The 15 accounts showing payments to you from Evelyn Blackwell's foundation. 8 years of documentation. We have all of it. The color drained from Derek's face entirely. He looked, suddenly, like a hollow thing. A puppet with its strings cut. They found the hidden cameras in his bedroom closet, still in their boxes. They found the spreadsheets on his laptop, $287,400 stolen across 8 years from 13 different women. 13 different futures interrupted. 13 different lives compressed into numbers and percentages, and Derek's careful accounting of his own cruelty. "Please," Derek whispered, and his voice cracked into pieces. "Please, I'll leave the city. I'll disappear. I'll go anywhere. Just please." "It's too late for that," Carlo said without inflection. "You should have thought about mercy before you decided to steal from her." At 5:31 p.m., at a neutral location, a coffee shop in the West Loop that Nico owned through a shell corporation, Rowan sat across from a television reporter named Mitchell Harris. His suit was navy. His teeth were too white. His eyes contained something that looked like respect, which was a strange thing to see pointed in her direction. The interview lasted 11 minutes. Rowan told the story of 8 years. She described the first time Derek had cornered her in the kitchen walk-in, the cold of the industrial refrigerator mixing with the heat of her own terror. She described the way he had learned to hurt her in places that would not show bruises. She described the money stolen, the tips she had earned through her own labor, her own aching feet, her own smile despite the exhaustion, money that Derek had decided belonged to him. She showed the cameras the scars on her wrists. She named Derek Collins. She named Evelyn Blackwell. She named the lodge where Emma lived, and she said clearly, she is a child. She deserves to be safe. When Mitchell asked her why she was telling this story now, her voice steadied into something unbreakable. "Because there are 12 other women," Rowan said. "And they deserve to not be invisible anymore. They deserve to have their money. They deserve to have their lives back. And the people who took those things deserve to answer for it." The interview went live at 5:24 p.m. By 6:04 p.m., 47,000 people had shared it. By 6:11 p.m., the first news outlet picked it up. By 6:19 p.m., Evelyn Blackwell's face was being broadcast alongside evidence. Video of Derek stealing tips from the register. Bank records showing his payments. Testimony from other victims whose information Nico's team had compiled. Rowan's scars repeated across 100 screens. The truth, finally, moving at the speed of light. At 6:15 p.m., federal agents were moving simultaneously. Derek Collins heard the sound of his apartment door being breached before he saw the guns. He was throwing clothing into a duffel bag when the first agent appeared in his bedroom doorway. He ran. It was stupid and pointless, but he ran. They caught him at the stairwell. They pressed him against the wall, his face scraping concrete, his arms twisted behind him in a way that sent pain screaming through his shoulders. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound like a closing coffin lid. News cameras captured every frame. At the penthouse on Michigan Avenue, Evelyn was in the middle of a dinner party. The guest list included 2 city council members, a federal judge, and the president of Northwestern University. She was holding a glass of something expensive, laughing, when her security team radioed that the building was surrounded. The FBI broke through the penthouse door at 6:18 p.m. Evelyn's face transformed, shock, then rage, then something worse. Something that looked like the moment a person realizes their entire life has been a performance on a stage that is about to collapse. She tried to run to the bedroom. 2 agents cut her off. They spun her around, pressed her against the window where the city lights were blinking on, and snapped the handcuffs closed. "This is a mistake," she screamed. "Do you know who I am? Do you understand who my husband is? My lawyer will." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, and Evelyn's voice cut off as if someone had thrown a switch. The entire dinner party watched. 30 witnesses. 30 cameras recording on their phones. By the time Evelyn reached the lobby, her face was already being shared across social media. The charitable foundation that had borne her name began removing her signature from their website within 45 minutes. Her husband filed for divorce by 8:13 p.m. Her friends, those luminous creatures who had orbited her wealth like planets around a star, began issuing statements about how they had never truly known her, how they were shocked and horrified, how they were cooperating with federal authorities. The systematic destruction was complete. Not death, too quick, too easy, too merciful. But erasure. A more perfect punishment. Derek Collins faced 17 counts of racketeering, blackmail, wage theft, and assault. 40 years in federal prison if convicted on all charges. Evelyn Blackwell faced 28 counts including conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. 52 years. Both were denied bail. Both were remanded into custody. At 9:07 p.m., Rowan sat on the leather sofa in front of the fireplace at the lodge, watching the news coverage unfold. The anchor was speaking her name with something that sounded like respect. Rowan Morales, whose courage has sparked a movement of accountability across the restaurant industry. The camera cut to footage of other women coming forward. A woman named Sarah. A woman named Chen. A woman named Marcus. One by one, they were beginning to speak. The avalanche was growing. It was rolling forward with its own momentum, gathering more victims, more testimony, more documentation of cruelty that had finally been named. Rowan's phone buzzed. She almost didn't answer. It was Emma's father. She could hear the child in the background, and her heart stopped beating, then started again in an entirely different rhythm. "Rowan?" Emma's small voice, uncertain and hopeful. "Rowan, are you really coming back?" Rowan's throat closed. When she spoke, her voice broke into pieces and reformed itself into something stronger. "I promise, sweetheart. I promise." Nico sat beside her on the sofa, and though he did not touch her, his presence was like a weight that kept her anchored to the earth. Outside, the November night pressed against the windows. Inside, there was warmth. Inside, there was light. Inside, there was the beginning of something that looked, for the first time in 8 years, like a future. 3 months had passed since the night the truth broke open like a dam. January pressed against the windows of Chicago with frost and thin light. The city's winter skyline cut sharp and cold against a pale gray sky. Rowan Morales stood in her own apartment, 400 square feet on the north side, walls the color of cream, a window that faced east toward the rising sun. The rent was $800 a month. Nico had helped her secure it through a property manager who asked no questions about her history. She had $8,000 in a bank account that felt like an ocean of money when her entire life she had carried $17. The trials had ended in December. Derek Collins received 35 years. Evelyn Blackwell received 42. Both were remanded to federal facilities. Both had appealed. Both would spend the remainder of their lives looking at concrete walls and the inside of their own regret. Rowan's testimony had lasted 4 hours. She had sat in that wooden chair, facing the attorneys, her mother's gold locket cold against her collarbone, and she had told the truth. Every shift worked without pay. Every bruise. Every threat. Every night she had counted the hours until morning as if counting would make it come faster. The courtroom had been silent except for her voice, steady and clear, building toward something like thunder. When the guilty verdicts came back, she had felt nothing at first. Then, in the bathroom of the courthouse, she had locked the stall and wept until her body forgot how to make sound. She had started online courses for social work. The first module was called Trauma and Recovery. She read about attachment and dissociation, about the nervous system's memory for danger, about how safety is not the absence of threat but the presence of reliable protection. She understood these concepts not from textbooks but from the inside of her own cells. Emma. The little girl was 7 now. Rowan saw her 3 times a week in supervised visits at a family center on Milwaukee Avenue. The court had terminated Evelyn's parental rights based on new evidence, testimony from housekeeping staff that Evelyn had known about Derek's abuse and had done nothing. Worse, she had counseled silence. Rowan had been approved as Emma's legal guardian. The paperwork had gone through in late February. Emma now called her not Miss Rowan but something else. Something that made Rowan's throat close every time she heard it. The transformation had happened in fragments. A grocery store trip where Rowan chose what she wanted to eat without calculating calories or checking prices. A coffee shop where she ordered something expensive and did not feel guilty. A mirror where she stood and looked at her own face and recognized someone she might have chosen to know. Nico Ferraro had kept his distance while simultaneously being everywhere. Carlo had appeared one morning to drive her to her first court appearance. No explanation. Just a black sedan at 7 in the morning and a quiet man in a grey suit who did not ask questions. The drives became a pattern. Court dates. Hospital appointments to document the old injuries. Her first day of classes at a community college on the city's south side. Carlo would appear, would drive her, would wait, would deliver her home, and would disappear like smoke. An anonymous payment had arrived at her bank account. $800 deposited with a reference note that said only, first month. She had called Nico immediately. He had answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. That wasn't necessary, she had said, her voice tight with something between gratitude and fury. It was necessary, he had replied. His voice sounded different over the phone, deeper, like it was coming from a place below words. I don't take charity. You're not taking charity. You're receiving something someone who cares about you chose to give. There's a difference. She had hung up on him because she could not name what she was feeling, and naming was the only thing she could control. Then came the flowers. They arrived the night after her testimony. 12 white roses in a crystal vase, the kind of arrangement that cost more than she used to make in a week. The card was one sentence, "You were magnificent." The handwriting was sparse and clean. The word magnificent had undone something in her chest. She had spent 8 years being called useless, broken, defective. No one had ever called her magnificent. She had sat on the edge of her new bed in her new apartment and held the card and wept again, but this time the tears tasted different. A week into her first semester, another delivery arrived. Flowers again, but these were different. Wildflowers in shades of blue and gold. The card said, "For the bravest person I know." She had thrown the card across the room. Then retrieved it. Then kept it on her nightstand. The pattern continued through January, small and deliberate, like someone learning how to be present without overwhelming. A coffee delivery on a morning she had mentioned wanting a particular kind. A book left at her apartment door, a memoir by a woman who had survived, who had written about rebuilding. A text message at midnight that simply said, "Sleep well." She had not texted back. Not for weeks. Then came a Friday evening at 7 o'clock. Neutral territory. A coffee shop on Division Street where she chose to meet him. She had selected this place, had set the time, had made the decision. This was the shape of control, the ability to choose where and when. Rowan arrived early. She wore a blue sweater that she had bought with her own money, having walked into a store and selected something because she wanted it. Her hair was down. Her nails were clean. She carried herself differently now, her spine straight, her chin level. The waitress brought her water without being asked. Nico arrived at exactly 7. He wore a dark coat, open at the neck, no tie. His hair showed silver at the temples in a way it had not 3 months before. He moved through the coffee shop with the same deliberate grace she remembered, but something in his eyes was different. Something older. Something that had been worn down by winter. He did not sit immediately. He stood across from her like someone asking permission to exist in the same space. "I'm not going to run," Rowan said quietly. "You can sit." He sat. The small table between them held a coffee cup and a universe of things that had not been said. "How are the classes?" he asked. "Hard," she said. "Interesting. I'm learning that trauma is not a personal failure. It's a wound." "Yes." They sat in silence. The coffee shop held the sound of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, the weight of everything they were not discussing. "Why did you really help me?" Rowan asked finally. "The wallet. You could have hired someone to return it. You didn't have to come yourself. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to." "To what?" "To care." Nico set his coffee down carefully. His hands were large, scarred, the hands of someone who had lived in violence. When he spoke, his voice was textured with something that sounded like confession. "My wife died 7 years ago," he said. "Car accident." Or that's what the police report said. "I knew better. Someone wanted her dead to send a message to me. She was innocent. She was kind. She was the only good thing in my life, and I lost her anyway." Rowan did not move. She waited. "After she died, I told myself I would change. I told myself I would become someone worthy of her memory. But grief is easier to carry as rage. Rage is a direction you can move toward. So I didn't change. I just moved deeper into the same darkness." The wind outside rattled the coffee shop windows. "On the night you returned my wallet, I was standing on a bridge in the rain. I had $4,000 in cash. I was going to hire someone to find the man who killed my father. I was going to break the promise I made to my wife, that I would not use our loss as justification for creating more loss. I was one phone call away from becoming the worst version of myself." Rowan's breath had stopped somewhere between her ribs. "Then you came to my door with that wallet. You had $17. You could have taken that money and never looked back. No one would have known. The world would have called you reasonable. But you came to my door and you returned what wasn't yours, even though you had nothing." His eyes met hers, and they were not the cold eyes of a crime lord. They were the eyes of a man who had been standing in the rain and who had watched a stranger show him something about what it meant to be human. "I saw you that night," he continued. "I saw who you were. And I thought, here is someone with almost nothing who chooses integrity. Here is someone the world has tried to break who keeps choosing to be good. If she can do that, then maybe I don't have to be the monster I've become." Rowan's hand moved across the table without asking permission from her mind. She touched his hand. His skin was warm. His hand was solid. She had touched him once before, the night he had carried her bleeding into his lodge. But this was different. This was not rescue. This was recognition. "I'm not broken anymore," she said. "I don't need saving." "I know," Nico said quietly. "That's why I'm here." The coffee shop continued its ordinary sounds around them. Other people ordered drinks. Someone's phone rang. The fluorescent lights hummed their fluorescent hum. But in the small space between them, something had shifted like tectonic plates. Something had moved into a new configuration. "There's something else," Nico said. "Something I need you to know. About the night you returned the wallet, about the choice I made afterward. But that's not a conversation for here." Rowan nodded. She was learning to wait. She was learning that some things were worth the waiting. They sat until the coffee went cold, until the evening deepened outside the windows into dark, until the coffee shop manager began wiping down the machines. And when Rowan finally stood to leave, Nico stood with her. He did not touch her. He walked her to her car. He stood in the cold until she had driven away. She watched him in her rearview mirror, a man in a dark coat on a January night, waiting until her taillights disappeared. 3 months of silence, then 3 months of small gestures, then 3 months that had somehow moved her from broken to building toward something that looked like a future. She did not know yet that the future would include spring rain and a confession that would remake everything. She did not know about the decision that was waiting for her in April, about the moment when she would be asked to trust someone who had once lived in darkness and who was choosing, every single day, to live differently. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she was not counting down the hours until morning. For the first time, she was counting up the hours until she would see him again. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.